Welcome to the Anthro to UX podcast, where you will learn how to break into UX with an anthropology degree. Through conversations with leading anthropologists working in user experience, you will learn firsthand how others made the transition, what they learned along the way, and what they would do differently. We will be discussing what it means to do UX research from a practical perspective and what you need to do to prepare a resume and portfolio. I'm your host, Matt Arts, a business anthropologist specializing in design anthropology and working at the intersection of product management, user experience, and business strategy. Let's get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. I'm Matt Arts with Anthro to UX. I'm here today with Liz Rodwell. Liz is an assistant professor of digital media at the University of Houston, also the executive director of the Houston UXPA chapter, previously a senior UX researcher at Schlumberger, and has a forthcoming book, which we'll touch on at the end. So Liz, thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. So today, what I'd like to talk about is, of course, your experience in UX and what you're doing in the education space, but also sort of the transition, in your case, of where you went from industry back. But before we get there, could you tell me a little bit about how you came into anthropology?
Well, Anthro for me was really, it came out of my interest in media and technology. When I was an undergrad, I did not take a single Anthro course. I thought of Anthro as requiring me to go to a remote island somewhere, live in a tent. I had no interest in that. I was always interested in really internet culture back in my college days. And I didn't think Anthro had that to offer. So it really took a trip to my university career services as an undergrad. And they said either I should go off and become an anthropologist or a fiction writer. So I decided to check out Anthro after doing so much media studies. And I kind of got sucked into the cult and have been here ever since.
Very cool.
So yeah, it was a weird transition at first. I felt like I was the only one in my master's program who had no Anthro experience.
Yeah, well, I can sort of understand your feeling there because I went to the UNT program after studying business, so I came into it later, and I had never heard of it in undergrad, never took a course either. But of course, it's not too late, and you've now sort of made that work really well. And so, at what point did you, in the course of your studies, start really learning about UX, and how did you end up at Schlumberger?
Well, I made it all the way through my PhD program, having never heard of UX. So I graduated and fully intended to go the academic route, but I am married to a designer, and he took me to an AIGA event, which is the American Institute of Graphic Artists. And they used to do an event in Houston called Cocktails with Creatives. And it was pretty well attended, and I wound up talking to a guy who absolutely lit up when I said that I was an anthropologist. And he said that he was hiring people to work in UX. And I had to go home and Google that. I really had not heard the term. And when he said that he could use someone with my experience, I expected that he was going to have me do field work related to the mobile apps and software that his company developed. Mm-hmm. So this was first for a company called Softway here in Houston. So I started there, and for the first month, I still had no idea what UX was, even though it was in my job title. So I really learned on the fly, which is how I think I've had to learn pretty much everything. I think I'm a bit of a late bloomer when it comes to most of the areas I pursued. So I tend to wind up in the deep end before I actually really know what I'm doing in the pool. And so it was through experience. It was a few days into the job, and he told me to do some wireframes for an app design. And I was mystified. So I got on Google again and was like, wireframes.
Calling your husband.
I should say I actually did have a graphic design background. Before Anthro, I was an instructional assistant professor of graphic design for 5 years. And so I at least came in knowing all of the tools. I'd done web design. Apps weren't a thing when I was doing it yet, but it helped a little bit. So there's like a tiny bit less lost. But yeah, I got my first UX job at a bar.
That's not uncommon, I would say, nor is it uncommon for people to come in, or having graduated, never hearing of UX, right? We all know that most anthropology programs aren't really teaching to work in UX per se, although you're learning the skills, you're not necessarily learning the terminology of the industry and how to work in it. And of course, we'll get to what you're doing now in the academic space. But so to go back, so you have some design experience. You also have a partner who's a designer. You're at it essentially sort of, an event in that industry, networking with people. Obviously, it all comes together, makes sense. And you have the research skills to really do the work. But there again, there's still all that terminology like wireframes, like so much else that is new. And so, in that early stage, what was, aside from kind of quickly Googling things, what were you really doing, to sort of upskill?
Well, it was, it really was a lot of Googling, but also it was sort of furtively asking people what these things were. So it's really, UX has transformed in the last, 7 years. So I started, 7 years ago, I started in UX. And I didn't have any peers from anthropology really to ask about this stuff, to ask this stuff of. Most of the folks I know who had gone into the applied area had gone into NGOs, nonprofits of different sorts, some straight government work. I knew a couple of people who were in tech but not working in UX, and so I started to look for books. I was fortunate in having worked on in my dissertation on corporate ethnography to an extent. So I knew some of the folks who were involved in organizations like EPIC, and were talking about this stuff pretty early on. So I looked for what they were writing and talking about too, to try to figure out what the role of anthropology in this stuff was, because it seemed like, and it still seems in many work environments, like there's a real emphasis on quantitative research skills over the qualitative. So I didn't know what I could contribute at first versus like my psychology colleagues, or even the quantitative sociologists. I was like, who's going to pay for field work? But I have to say it was really different when I got to Schlumberger, because they really emphasize field work.
Okay. And so going back over those 7 years, what else did you see as a change?
Well, it was like a slow trickle of people asking me how to get into UX. And I wish back then I'd actually made a website that was just, nobody likes to hear that I got the job at a bar because that's hard to replicate. But, people started to ask, should I do certificate programs? Should I go back to school and get an additional degree? Which, my answer to that is almost always no. Most of the people who ask me have sunk enough time into higher education, and we don't necessarily need another degree. People ask me for blueprints more and more. So it was, it really was like a snowball. And it got to the point where then people stopped asking because there were so many more resources. So now I'd say, at least a third of the folks that I know who are anthropologists are either looking to get into that line of work, looking to at least freelance in UX, or, just end up in the field somehow. So, there are a lot of resources that aren't me now, and that's helpful.
Yeah, for sure. And some, there's a lot of human resources of many of us, right, who are willing to kind of help out. But there's also a lot of other resources, including boot camps, and actually now navigating that is actually challenging, right? And finding the right sort of use of time and dollars. which in some cases dollars are needed. It's self-study, there's plenty of free materials. But so finding the right fit for everybody has actually now become kind of challenging. But also in the same time, over those 7 years, like say in the New York market, which is where I was, I watched it from not many UX research roles being available to just now there being so many that it's pretty startling just to see the change in that time. But so
Yeah.
in your transition, so you said when you ended up at Schlumberger, it was more field work. So, what were you doing there? What kind of in-context research were you doing?
Well, that was actually a really fascinating place to work. And at first I thought, coming from agencies, working for this, one of the largest corporations in the world, I was going to have a really tough transition. But the teams there were pretty cool and, filled with creative people. So it was an awesome place to work. My first couple of days on the job, they told me that I was going to need to get a hard hat, basically a full set of PPE, so personal protective equipment. I needed steel-toed boots, I needed gloves, I needed goggles, I needed an official jumpsuit, and I needed to go get rig certified so I could go out on oil rigs and not, take the whole thing down with me, which was a really different type of UX research. I mean, here in Houston, we have a lot of energy UX. So it's a lot of really extreme environments and trying to figure out how people can use technology comfortably in occasionally very harsh conditions. So it's pretty fascinating UX. But, watching training videos where it was like, you won't be able to smell the gas, but you better run. Or, there were some really alarming videos. And when we had to go around the room and say why we were in these training sessions, it was people who are all like, oil production workers. And then we get to me and I'm like, well, I'm an anthropologist. And that didn't go over well. I mean, it didn't go over poorly, but everybody was really confused. So the field work there ranges from going to, offshore sites, locations, to going to facilities locally or in other parts of Texas, or, so it can be office environment field work, but it can also be, field work in some pretty extreme sites of oil and gas production. And, I had a couple of colleagues who were constantly traveling all over the world. Norway was a big one, to do this field work. So they were interested in hiring really a lot of qualitative researchers for this kind of energy work, because so much of it was field work oriented. And we had plenty of people who could do the in-office work, but they were always like, how much can you travel? And are you picky about where you'll travel? So.
And was it always connected to digital products, or were you also doing, sort of UX work in a broader sense, where it was more maybe like kind of work practice and even like, with sort of industrial products?
The group that I worked with, we did digital products. So it always eventually, they ended up being digital. But I think there were people in UX, even within Houston, who I didn't meet until after I left the job. So I'm sure there were people there working on things that were really a departure from the stuff I was working on. I mean, just in Houston alone, we had several buildings, and my co-director of the UXPA here in Houston also worked at Schlumberger, and we never met. And he's a UX designer. So, same city. That's how big the teams were.
Yeah,
but,
big company.
Yeah. I mean, it's weird. Schlumberger was really ahead of the other companies people think of when they think of oil and gas, in terms of adopting UX. And we had a couple of evangelists there who were responsible for that, including a guy who started the UX program at Kent State.
Interesting.
So, really, really great ex-academic was sort of an applied psychology focused guy. Yeah.
And so then what was your experience like, having these evangelists, having people who are pushing this in an industry that a lot of people from the outside may not think is always the most
progressive?
Yeah, right. And so, having that, how was that sort of, I'm going to use the word mentorship, if you will, but compared to your previous experience, like how did that help you grow? And is that something today that you think, people really, starting out should be looking for?
I think what that taught me was, I had pretty much bought into the academic snobbery of we have one end goal in these PhD programs, and that's to end up someday a tenured professor. Mm-hmm. And applied work is, we're not going to talk about it. And an industry is a little bit dirty, regardless of whether it's literally dirty work like oil and gas. And it was actually a little bit of it was a lot of a wake-up call, really, to go into what I thought was going to be a really conservative corporate environment because of the nature of the work. Mm-hmm. Like I thought, somebody as liberal as me is not going to be in oil and gas. Really the teams there surprised me a lot. And also the mentorship I got there really surprised me. So I felt like people took me under their wing and improved my work as a UX researcher in the same way that I was mentored at the best of times in academia. And really by the same types of people too, because, these are also people who, like my Jason, who I worked with, the guy I was talking about at Schlumberger, he published a whole bunch of stuff. He has a solid academic track record, and he was like an advisor to me. But, he also, because of, the nature of the job, had to come in and say, look, like you also need to develop skills that you didn't have to have in academia. Mm-hmm. Like you need to be able to really hold your own in a room full of people who don't see the value in your work. And you need to be sort of independently accountable to those teams. And really, you need to not be deferential. That was one of the big ones. He was like, you've got to stop thinking in terms of rank and hierarchy, which I definitely came out of academia, sure. Thinking of like, okay, this person is, been a tenured professor for 20 years. Okay. But he was like, if someone's been on the job for 20 years, you still need to find those moments where you're not deferring to them, mm-hmm. Where you are the expert in the room. You are the only UX person in that space, and those people will walk all over you if you don't stand up for yourself. And yeah, they'll kick you off the project if you don't show your value really clearly. And yeah, I almost got kicked off a project learning the hard way that waiting for people to tell me what to do was not an effective strategy. Yeah, it is hard making the transition sometimes between like academic models for how we work and then work in the business world.
Yeah, sure.
Even just sometimes in terms of hours.
Yeah, pace. I mean, so many things.
Pace is a big one for sure.
Style of language. You could say depth. I don't want to say that what we do in industries doesn't have depth, but right, there's still a difference even in the way you portray it. So that was a really interesting point that I haven't heard anybody else bring up. And so I'm also kind of curious, in the past we've talked about, there's all kinds of skills that you need to develop. And I don't necessarily need to rehash them per se, but like, just things like project management and, sort of a lot of the business skills, right? We have to develop those. But something in your space that's kind of interesting, you also, your in context or in the field work is very different than a lot of digital product in the field work, and it's not to say that those who went through an academic program many of them have gone off into sort of, difficult environments, some, around the world, a whole new language, but yours is being a very heavy industry environment with, some significant dangers, there's also quite a few things that you probably had to learn in that space. So is there anything interesting that pops out from having those experiences that you would share with others?
Let's see. Well, I've actually I've learned, I think, as much from brief fieldwork encounters in UX as I did from doing Anthro fieldwork. So my fieldwork with UX has involved things like nuclear power plants and when I worked at the second agency I worked for, we had clients in all areas of energy, and my academic fieldwork has been in corporate environments, but definitely less dangerous corporate environments. Yeah. So, there was little risk of me interrupting somebody's train of thought at a pivotal moment and causing some sort of, catastrophic equipment failure. What I learned really how to, I guess I'm trying to put this in like a non-corporate speak way, actually, but really pivot more flexibly and adapt my field work to the circumstances in front of me. So, with my longer term field work in the academic world, I could, if something went wrong or with my access, I could pause and regroup. But there were a lot of cases where, I would show up for field work somewhere and the parts wouldn't have talked to each other and people didn't know I was coming, or, the access wasn't there, or in some cases, like, nobody remembered to meet me and I was horribly lost, or, but there wasn't time to really sort that out and have a meltdown about it. It was, I've got sometimes like a day or a couple of weeks to figure this out, and it has to happen. So yeah, the adjustment, the timeline adjustment has been a big one. I think a lot of the field work in the energy industry, it actually has reminded me a lot of, I haven't seen any really catastrophic moments
thankfully,
in production, although I have colleagues who have. I haven't seen anything really dramatic. But it reminded me a lot of watching live television when I did my dissertation fieldwork. So, you're in control rooms and there are, things have to happen at specific times. You have to press the button at a particular moment. Everybody has a little bit of adrenaline because it's live. Mm-hmm. It is a performance. And then there's a researcher in the space who's kind of in the way, really. People want their stuff to work better in the long run, but, in the short term, you're there and you really have no demonstrable value. So that's the case also in the energy, in the energy industry. It's industries, I should say. Where things happen quickly. Sometimes there's a lag, but there's a lot of performance going on as well. A lot of this happens, that happens, that happens in quick succession, and people are distracted and don't have time for you. So when I teach fieldwork, I try to teach patience even when you don't have really what it seems like the time to be patient. When you need to come back with findings quickly, because a lot of the workflow needs you to take a breath and allow it to happen, for you to really learn things from the people around you. Yeah.
So how did you kind of get accustomed to that, especially coming out of the PhD program? I mean, was that just sort of a natural process? Was it, your mentor kind of really helping you kind of get your mind around, sort of the different pace and how to approach it? Or
I always think I learn things the hard way. So I feel like I probably, I had a couple of really good colleagues at my second agency who, because we were an agency and we had clients and we had to deliver, were always giving me timelines that I was uncomfortable with. And I would say there's no way I can do that number of interviews in 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
It's just not possible. Like, I'm not a machine, people. Like, if I was designing the project, I would do that number of interviews over like a semester. And so, yeah, there was one case where somebody gave us a timeline and my project manager quit after she saw it. She just quit. So she was like, I'm fed up with this. You people and your unreasonable timelines. And she, gave her notice. And I was like, well, I'm going to try this. And it worked. Like, it was actually fine. And this was a project for a client who's in nuclear power. And those were some of the best, well, the most bizarre and interesting interviews I've ever done, because people use them as like little therapy sessions. But I kept quiet about the timelines for a while because I felt like a fish out of water in corporate environments already. And so I was like, if something feels wrong, it's probably me. And so timelines still are actually kind of challenging for me. Yeah, I know people who are, when they do, when they estimate the time that they're going to need for a project, are really on the nose about it. Mm-hmm. And, I've had folks tell me, take what you think you're going to need time-wise and double it.
Yeah,
which
classic.
Is lovely if you can get that. But I've never been great at saying this is how long something's going to take me. So I tend to cave to the short timeline, and then just try to make it happen. And it's tricky to know. I mean, I think some folks in Anthro who are really good grant writers are probably good at timelines, mm-hmm. but I always felt like I was lying when I wrote a timeline because I had no idea if it was true. Like, yeah, I wrote some grants where I was like, in July, I'm going to do this. And then I had no idea. But yeah, in the business world, if I get to July and I don't deliver, then I'm maybe fired. So, yeah.
Yeah, estimating planning is an important skill, which, there are, of course, there's ways to sort of go about learning some methods around that. And it's a very useful thing to put in some time. I came out of a business background. And so, we basically have a little bit of more training, in that space. And so today, when I'm kind of in my UX/product role, I'm constantly estimating for projects. And I can see, why it's challenging when you're new to it, but it also, it helps everything, right? It helps everything run smoother for all parties involved. So it's one of those things for anybody listening that I would recommend, sort of putting in some effort to learn early on. And it's also, I think it's also just good. I mean, if you're going to sort of rush and just get it done, even if you're kind of like, even if that means you're working at night, well, okay, that's a decision that somebody can make, right? And come in on time. But also, if you don't want to do that or can't do that for some reason, right, sort of planning it appropriately sort of just helps all parties sort of stay happy with each other, right? And
yeah, and the undergraduates in my program have to take a class on this.
That's great.
And yeah, there's a class called costing, which is time and money estimating, and it's a whole class. And I think, why did I not have anything that practical? Like, I need costing far more than I need, the intricacies of Foucault these days. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, this is what you get, I think, when you go into some of the more, I guess, practical parts of academia.
Yeah, and so we're definitely going to touch on that. But before we kind of make the jump to academia, so in the last Anthro to UX episode, I was talking a little bit with Anthony Shinoda about the sort of his transition from the agency life to a product company, and that you pretty much did the same thing. So building on that last conversation, I'm just wondering if you have a take on that, and why did you make the transition from agency to Schlumberger? Was there anything kind of pros and cons or anything that you learned that's just interesting to point out that might resonate with listeners of the previous episode?
Well, somebody once told me, one of my old colleagues told me that agencies are for the young. And he said that because, he was in his 50s and he was like, I got to the point where I couldn't work those timelines anymore. It's too fast paced. The need to please clients is too intense. There are too many projects. And, I wanted to coach Little League. And I feel like there's some truth in that. Like in-house can be a much more moderate pace. The timelines on my in-house projects were really a lot more generous. We had, like in the summer, we had the slowdown. So people would say, you know what? Let's not deliver that in July. Let's deliver that in August after I go to the Bahamas. But, we always wanted to be, we wanted to get repeat business in the agencies. So we always pushed for the aggressive deadline.
Sure.
And, usually we had, in agencies, like you've got all these, you've got the people who are pitching for the projects, the sales folks who are out there saying, well, we can do it for this amount in this time. And sometimes, when you stick to that, you put yourself in a little bit of a bind timing wise. I've definitely had experiences where we oversold what we could do in a particular time. And that was tense, but we wanted that client to come back. We wanted to be the agency that like Cisco uses or IBM or, we wanted to put them on our homepage under our clients list and gloat.
Yeah.
But, in a big corporate environment, there's a lot of like what I think of as middle-aged benefits. There's, comfortable things like some places have childcare. They have, relocation assistance. They have great benefits. They have it's less exciting day to day in some places, I'll say. Not all, but, a lot of my colleagues have gone on from agencies to other, big companies. And we're all like, it's a little bit more laid back, but in a good way. So it depends on what you're going for. I have one of my old colleagues at the agency. She's still there because she loves that. Like that kind of dynamic work environment just is really suitable for her. So she's never going to go in-house. Yeah. I think it can be a little more boring too. I think in-house, it depends. You only have a lot of the time you have like teams within the company, but you don't have all those different kinds of clients. So yeah,
your subject matter might be the same, or just a little variation on that. But I think it's important, I think it's a good point and a good addition to the conversation I had from the previous episode. But also, I think what's important about this, and that I talk about sometimes, is like picking the right company. Now, I appreciate that some of us have to sort of take the job that we're offered the interview for in times in life, right? And that happens to everybody at least one point in their career, probably. But
sure.
There are other points. Maybe that's because you're in New York and you have, options. Maybe that's because you're more mature in your career and you have options, but whatever it may be. There are, there's a number of things that can help you sort of pick the right place, like that kind of startup culture or agency model versus, a large organization. And, even something I oftentimes say to people, like, if you like process and you've like rules and like, maybe you want to go for the bigger company versus if you are okay just kind of getting in, rolling up your sleeves and helping like to kind of figure things out and define things, well, then maybe you want to start up, right? And there's lots of ways you could look at this. And but some of what you're talking about sort of plays into that. And I think it's just important for people to recognize that picking, if you want to apply to if you want a certain lifestyle, you might want to pick certain places over another.
Well, and one thing that I think doesn't come up enough is that a lot of folks I know have picked where they work because they needed to be in a particular city.
Yeah.
They couldn't relocate. It's nice that a lot of us get these great job pitches on LinkedIn, LinkedIn, home of the recruiters. But, I can't move to Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
So for me, I didn't enjoy going to the AAA and saying I worked in oil and gas. That doesn't make you the most popular anthropologist. I mean, if you're going to work applied, you at least have to work somewhere that's like not oil and gas. So, but yeah, I'm in Houston and I have to be in Houston.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of folks who I went to grad school with have to be in a lot of specific places around the country and the world. And they may not have the really robust UX options that, even a city like Houston, we're huge. We may not be as hip, but we're huge. So we have a lot of options, but, some folks I know are in small towns and are still explaining what UX is.
Yeah, fair point. So moving on in your career path. So unlike everybody else that I have interviewed so far, you chose to leave industry and go back to academia. So
because I hate money. I didn't want to ever have any of it or be able to pay bills.
Fair.
Yeah.
But so, why did you choose to go in that direction?
Well, I was always adjuncting when I was in business. I never stopped teaching because I actually love teaching. And I didn't get to do mentoring people in the office was great, but I really wanted to teach. So there was that. And one of the people I worked with, another mentor at Schlumberger, actually was on the advisory panel for the program that I now work for at the University of Houston. And so she would go as an industry advisor and help them to develop their courses. And so she told them that they needed UX. Like, if you're going to have a digital media program, you really need to start teaching UX. Mm-hmm. And so when they started putting out feelers saying, okay, we're going to hire for someone to actually build a UX program here, I was like, this is too tempting, because there is a real lack of UX in higher education. And the idea of being able to send out students who had that as an undergrad was just really appealed to me. And being able to create a UX lab, the guy who I worked with at Schlumberger, Jason, had built one. Like I said, he did the whole program at Kent State. And so he built a UX lab and actually sat down with me. And, he came over to the University of Houston with me and looked at the room and helped me draw out what I wanted to do.
That's great.
Because I'd never gotten to build a lab before. I'd been in labs, but I don't know much about, things like really AV equipment, really at all. So, I was like, okay, what kind of cameras do I want? What should, do I want a one-way mirror? And I actually didn't wind up going with the one-way mirror, but that's because they wouldn't let me punch a hole in the wall. So, but yeah, there's starting to be more interest in UX in other disciplines in the academic world as well. Like digital humanities has started to put out the feelers for that. So I'm working on a project in the digital humanities with an historian. But I'm also trying to make sure that I keep my ties to industry, so that my students have people who are in industry coming in to talk to them, mm-hmm. and are doing projects with industry partners whenever possible. So yeah, having a lab means that I'll be able to involve students in practical work in that area too. I've hired a few of my students as research assistants on UX projects, so they're actually getting to do some of this stuff. And I'm a little jealous, because where was this stuff when I was in college?
Yeah, sure. Right.
We didn't have mobile phones when I was in college, but anyway, at least I didn't.
Yeah, a lot has changed since then.
I know. Sheesh. Yeah, but I think what is really tiny right now at the University of Houston has the potential to grow even bigger. And even if I can leave a mark there for UX and help it to be an alternative or something that students who are already enrolled in college can do instead of having to graduate and then pay additional money for a certificate program. That would be great because UH is sort of it's one of the real centers of Houston life. It's the University of.
Thanks for sharing all that you did about the program. What I'd like to step back and kind of get a few more details, though. So what are students actually graduating with? What is the degree?
Digital media. Yeah.
Okay. And so like how will anybody know that they studied UX? Is it like, a sort of focus or a specialization, or is it just a few courses?
Right now, they won't know unless the student actually goes and shows them their portfolio. This is what I hope for the program in the future, is that it will be a track within digital media, because we have a few different tracks right now, and UX should be one of them. I'm hindered a bit by just the nature of academia in needing to focus on research first and curriculum development second right now. So this is so far something of it's my dream. But we're lucky enough to have 2 new faculty members joining us in August, and one of them has a lot of UX experience as well. So I'm hoping to loop her in to be my ally in really making this a track, because having a couple of courses isn't enough. We know this because the demand is insane. And not just from digital media students. Like I'm an affiliate of the Comparative Cultural Studies program, so we have Anthro students wanting to take it. We have computer science students wanting to take it. We have architecture students. We have people from really so many different disciplines who have heard about UX. Somebody told me they saw an article on LinkedIn that UX was like the most the most up and coming, the hottest discipline to be in the next 5 years. And so they were like, that's why I want to take this course. But it's always full. It's always maxed out. Like I teach about 90 students at once, and it's always full, and we always have a waiting list. And so the demand is so intense that we really need to keep building it out in that area. And that's something I'm super into the idea of doing. It's really cool that there are that many people who want to do UX, even if maybe some of them just heard about it and don't know what it is yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I get a lot of people who are asking all kinds of questions that are, there's a lot of articles, like you say, right, talking about the potential of it, the growth of it, the salaries of it, right? And so that's bringing a lot more people, which is wonderful. It's all, of course, also creating more competition for people finding jobs, anthropologists, of course, being some of them, but really, the thing about UX is it's open to anybody, right? At this point, social science, business, you name it, you have people coming from sort of all walks of life, which is maybe another reason why, more training programs that formalize that a little are not such a bad thing. Yeah. But so I love what you're doing, not to sort of, tout any of your quote unquote, maybe competitors, but do you know of other programs who are doing such things? Because, when I look around, a little bit that I've looked around and say other anthropology programs, I don't really come across anybody who's like really teaching UX within the context of an anthropology program, but I'm also not, looking beyond that per se. So
yeah.
Do you know of other, besides University of Houston, is there anywhere else that people might want to look if they can't come there or,
Yeah. So I just came out with an article recently called Building a UX Research Program, and it's in Practicing Anthropology, the journal, because I was trying to figure out if there was anybody else doing this. And one of the other leaders in building UX research programs or UX programs in a university setting is the Savannah College of Art and Design, SCAD. So they have a great program. There's really not that much else. I think Georgia Tech might have something going on as well. But the model that most people are looking into using is really of kind of creating like a menu, like a couple of things in the UX program are done in a dedicated department, usually like a graphic design department. And then they have like an a la carte sort of situation where you have to take a course in Anthro and a course in basic stats and a course in psych. And I'm actually, by and large, in favor of that model because I think it's hard for, my program can't teach stats or, we do actually teach some sort of data. We have data visualization in our department, but we can't teach stats as well as the stats people do. I'm not even going to touch, intro to psych or any kind of psychology course. And we don't actually teach design in our program. So I would rather build a couple of core UX and design thinking courses within our program and then have students who are doing that track do courses with the experts in the affiliated fields that contribute to UX. So yeah, I like to think I can teach a good Anthro course, but I'm not allowed because of the department I'm in. So yeah, there's also the rules of academia that have to be taken into account. Like, I can't teach Anthro because I'm not in the Anthro department. So I would send them over to the Anthro folks and have them take an Anthro course there. But yeah, I don't know. There are some places who are doing more with applied Anthro. But yeah, gosh, I could cheat and look right now at my list. And I'm really tempted to do so because let's see. So I have a colleague who's starting at Texas State University. And so she's really looking to build out the applied Anthro and to do a focus on UX there. And I think the University of North Texas does have.
Yeah, so I attended University of North Texas, and it's an applied program, and we can focus on business, tech, and design, but you still don't talk about UX. Or at least you didn't when I went through it, right? It's applied within the context of business broadly speaking, but you don't hear the terminology of UX. You still hear the language of an academic program. Right. And I've heard the same of University of Memphis, which also has a good applied program. But the ones who are really overtly coming out and saying UX, I just don't know of them yet. You're really the first one who I've heard who's trying to sort of
build that out.
Yeah. Build that out. And I know I saw that Chris Miller went to SCAD and it's Savannah School of Art and Design. And so I've looked at some of those programs and they do look great. But also SCAD's, at the price point of SCAD, it's also not for everybody.
Right. Exactly.
It's not a cheap school.
Yeah.
So,
but I guess to answer your question, there really isn't very much. I'm digging here for a reason. And so, academia is always a certain amount behind industry in the programs that are offered. There might be individual faculty members who are trying to promote this stuff, but in terms of actual degree programs, it is so slow to get the university beast to move that we tend to do what we can with creating courses here and there and building up programs gradually. But I think there are more and more anthropologists who are sensitive to the number of people who want to work in UX who are getting jobs right now and are hopefully going to contribute courses in that area, at least to get us all started.
So, considering you're very sort of early. Well, you're obviously on the ground floor. You have the opportunity, in your own at University of Houston to define a lot of this. So, what is it that you, aside from just teaching UX broadly, do you have any specific goals? I know you already said if possible to get it to be its own track, but what are you trying to accomplish out of this program?
Well, I'm trying to create UX research to actually use UX as both practical and a set of research skills in a university context. So, in the HCI community, there are a lot of people who do usability studies in an academic context. But I don't see much in the way of really training people to do UX per se. Like, it's like really a method here, a method there, or like really aggressive use of the word usability without much that's really linked to usability. I would like us to actually be doing cool experiments in UX and pushing UX as a discipline with the help of undergrads who can then go out into industry and create this link between the work they've done in UX in their academic life and the work they then go on to do in their careers in business. I think that there are a lot of great partnerships between academic institutions and business that have resulted in just really cool innovation. And I don't feel like UX should be left out of that. I would love to help businesses innovate using the tools that we've got that nobody else has. So, if we're going to have all these technology centers sponsored by the big tech companies of the world at universities, there needs to be some UX component in that tech development, and there really isn't right now. So, if you're going to have the Google Center for Innovation, and you're going to partner with computer scientists and do design incubation and all this stuff, again, where is the UX? It's too important to leave out. And if we don't have people on the university side saying UX, it's going to continue to be left out. So, I'm hopefully annoying about it in a good way on campus. Always trying to say, well, okay, this is a cool thing you're working on, but your model's really retro. And there's always like 2 steps: design, develop, and that's it in these projects. Academia does contribute a lot of there's such cool tech being developed at my university. I just I want to see UX have a voice in those projects.
Yeah, and so I obviously second it. It sounds great. I'm curious though, for somebody who I've adjuncted at a few places, but I'm not I've never gotten deeply involved in the academic politics in any way, right? I don't know some of the limitations. So for anybody else who might be listening that is also maybe thinking of teaching or doing something similar, what are some of, the challenges? What should some people maybe be aware of?
Well, I think one of the challenges is that you have to explain UX to absolutely everybody.
Which is not new to most of us who are already doing the work.
Yeah, that's really true. But you have, I feel like even more so in academia. You have to make a case for why it matters in business as well. But in academia, even more than in business, there's a tendency to silo. So with UX being so interdisciplinary, you really have to articulate a place for it. People are going to be like, well, that doesn't sound like our department, or can't they do that over in, design, or if we do a course in that, the, psychology is going to get pissed off, or so having the patience to keep pushing through the initiatives is part of it. And sometimes just to wait for people to retire, I think. It does require education and saying this is how this course is different from anything else that's being offered, and a willingness to go into the business world and show the metrics for why this is something that should be taught. Like these days, universities as we know, are really business minded. They want to see they want to see measurable outcomes for their students. They want to see who's getting jobs in what. And UX makes a case for itself when we show the rate of really new jobs in UX and how many people are going into the field. It's easy to convince some of the administrators that this is something we should offer. It's good business sense. A lot of the students coming in haven't heard of it either. So I think the other thing is to keep the ball rolling. Once you've got one course, which is a good place to start. I feel like, starting with a course is reasonable, manageable. If you say, like, I can teach this, here's a syllabus that I've made. Mm-hmm. This is why we should teach it and not anybody else. At least as a special topics course, it's a pretty easy sell. My first UX course started as a special topics course, and I just had seniors who were curious about it, and then it became a required part of, like, if you're a digital media major, you have to take UX as a freshman. It has to be one of the first things you take, so that you do no other development of your portfolio without keeping UX in mind.
That's great.
And but adding on courses is actually harder than getting the first one in. Like, the first one, it's like anything else. It starts to seem like, oh, well, that was easy. Let me just do another UX course. And then the second one is, well, we have one. Why do we need a second? Yeah, but
got it.
teaching UX in one semester it's a little hard. So.
Yeah, thanks. I'm not so aware of a lot of the inner workings of how some of that works. And in fact, when I taught product management, and that was a special topics course, and so hoping to sort of build out that. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's special topics is definitely a good place to start, and I can see, from my own experience, can see why. I didn't realize it would be a little harder after that to build the program. But yeah, interesting to know. What I'd also be curious, so. In the case of, I know you want it to be a track, and if it does, then presumably, I'm going to presume there's more courses that are kind of clearly within that track than maybe there would be today. But within this broader digital media program, is it also touching on anything tangential to UX, so product management, or even like UX strategy? I mean, I know in industry even there's like sort of, it's not clearly defined all the time what that really means as opposed to some other roles, but there's all these other roles that sort of are adjacent to UX where there's overlapping skills, and it's good to know how to sort of work in those or work with those partners. And so, is there any kind of other any other classes for other tech roles that would be good for a student to take, because then they're going to be a better partner working with them in the future?
Yeah, I think you're right about project management being a really important skill set. I think really project planning and the costing course I mentioned are important components. I actually like to send my students over to do basic courses in design, even if they're not designers. So mostly just because if you speak the language of design, it's easier to work in UX. And
sure, yeah.
So having like just, intro to design principles, courses where you're learning like the fundamentals, and not necessarily having to create a brilliant, a brilliant work of art, are really helpful. And my students tend to be a bit afraid of the straight graphic design courses, because they're over in digital media because they want to work in digital media, but they don't want to be artists. Mm-hmm. So, they're not generally people who tend to think of themselves as being good illustrators or, being somebody who's going to create a beautiful website for you. And although there are definitely exceptions. A lot of them are gun shy about the idea of going over into the design courses, but knowing the Adobe Creative Suite, even now, has been tremendously helpful for a lot of my students. I don't teach tools, so I say, like, okay, if you're if you want to learn, XD, or like, yeah, I mean, in the past, Sketch, you're gonna have to train yourself on your own on those, and they usually do. But yeah, a lot of the software is taught over in design, and so it's been helpful for folks to take courses over there too. I think just having a handle on data visualization and stats is really important. So we have data visualization. We've got my department includes the data scientists, so we have those courses, and I never would have touched those courses with a 10-foot pole as an undergrad because, I went into qualitative research for a reason. I am still really afraid of math, and I still find basic statistics a little bit confusing. So, yeah. And even though, in my second agency job, I had a very patient colleague who, she taught stats, and she adjuncted and taught stats. And so she trained me really well. And I still am nervous about stats. So I tell my students to tough it out because a lot of them are also really afraid of it. But being able to do the research, but also to represent your findings well and to figure out how to interpret them is really part of what I would moosh together into a program. Moosh is not a word, but I would put in the UX sandwich. So yeah, I always say that I wish I'd done stats as an undergrad, among things, because of the number of times I've been asked to do stats in the business world. We talk presentation methods, like we do. We have basically, we do a lot of professionalization in my program. So we have, how to present, how to build your portfolio, how to design an independent research project. And I didn't create those courses. Those predate me. So we ideally get people who can do a project, work independently on it, and come back and show their findings. And generally appear competent while they're doing it. Again, not something I learned in college.
Yeah.
So not entirely sure what I learned in college when I think about it, but.
Well, it sounds like a great program. So thanks for all that you're doing with that. And then, maybe to kind of pivot here towards the end, I'd be curious to know, one, is there anything you would recommend to anybody who's listening, in terms of maybe an education track that they should follow, or, what they should do if they've already graduated? I know you said, you're a little skeptical yourself of boot camps or maybe spending, more money on another degree. But, what if somebody was starting out, what would you tell them to do? And maybe if somebody's already graduated with an advanced degree, what would you tell them to do?
I tell people to, I tend to, and this, I'm trying to figure out if this is like an unpopular opinion, but I tell people to avoid, they don't hurt, but generally to avoid certificates and boot camps, because you can build up a portfolio by just doing little projects at first. And so this is part of why I try to hire my students back on research projects whenever possible, because those little projects add up to real jobs, to full-time jobs, I should say. And also to look for those jobs that will allow you to come in and let you learn while getting paid to learn. Somebody once told me, never do a PhD program where you have to pay tuition. Different from a master's where like you just bleed tuition all over the place. But a PhD program, people always said, if they don't give you a stipend, don't do it. You'll end up in serious debt. And I feel like it's sometimes, again, we all got to do what we got to do, particularly in a recovering economic climate. But if you can find those jobs where people will let you come in and learn from the UX folks, that's ideal if you have the option. and to build up that, to save the work you're doing that's UX related or adjacent, and to create that portfolio on the fly. I had a lot of colleagues at Schlumberger who liked the Nielsen Norman Group certification. So yeah, totally fine. Doesn't hurt anything. None of them hurt anything, of course. But if you can walk into a bar and find somebody who will give you a chance, that's, I think, even better, because you're not paying more.
Sure. It is much harder than 7 years ago, though.
Yes. Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah, you might not start out with the sexy job, I should say. And yeah,
it depends on the bar.
Yeah, you might not walk into or get recruited directly for the big ticket job, whatever that might be for somebody. But if you're willing to work at maybe a less sexy place for a little while, that might be an option. Yeah. But,
Yeah, to that point, it's not I guess some of these are in the bar setting, but there's a lot of, at meetups, there is still a lot of, who's hiring, right? And facilitating that interaction. Some of those actually are in bars, and some of them are in, large corporate settings. But point is there are still environments like that, just like AIGA, right? That, you're in the right space to actually to be in front of people who really do want to hire. And those are the kind of, that's the kind of networking in that space that's very productive.
Yeah.
Versus the random sort of, I just bump into somebody in the public space.
Well, and, that hasn't really been an option for over a year.
Well,
so
fair point.
Yeah, the benefit of the pandemic, probably one of the only benefits, was that all these great groups took their activities online. So you don't have that organic bumping into, but, you can find cool groups. Meetup is kind of a treasure trove, which I never thought I'd say. It used to be for finding a jogging group. But now, we have design hackathons that are always looking for UX team members, and they don't look at your resume. It's just go out there and jump onto a project and be the person who's willing to contribute a UX perspective. So yeah, looking for events wherever you live, I think, is helpful too. I send my students to those design hackathons to just get extra portfolio pieces.
That's great.
And contacts.
So in your role at UXPA, what are you doing? Oh, you're executive director, but tell me a little bit about that. What does that look like, and what's, what do you, how did that come about?
Well, I really wanted to make myself attend more events. And so because I tend to do things, I think, maybe a little strangely, instead of just going to an event, I decided to be the director. No, but they actually just, I'd only been at University of Houston for 3 or 4 months when they were looking for a new person. And I loved the idea of being able to host events at UH as part of that way my students would have events to participate in as a connection to my classes. And yeah, we have space to host them. That obviously broke down pretty quickly because I was only at University of Houston for 1 semester, and then the pandemic hit. So all of my grand plans became, Zoom meetups. But yeah, I thought of it as this could be a fantastic accessory to coursework. Having the coolest people in UX from this city come in and actually talk to us here. And so that's really why I wanted to do it. And, it was a way to really get to invite my dream speakers too. So there's a little bit of, just it's fun to do things like that because I get to say, well, hey, we're UXPA person I've always wanted to speak to. Would you like to come and do a talk for us? The other thing is I have former students on my board. So it's a way to give them, again, that additional cred as they're going into the job market. And
really nice.
I like to have at least two, what I call student liaisons, student reps who are still in school and can help me to see what kinds of events people who haven't even hit the job market want to see. My perspective on events is like just really different from theirs. And so without their voices, I would just do, events that sound cool to me, but don't have much to offer people who are just starting out.
Yeah, well, I like the idea of having the students on. That's really great. And to your point of the, what that contributes to them finding a job in the future is really, really, really a nice, bonus in all that, and definitely a good way to sort of bring all your resources together. So it's pretty creative. And it's really post pandemic, it should be pretty cool, to have it all back in person.
Because we used to have like we used to have like pizza and drinks, or like we used to actually get to kind of hang out socially, and now we have like me playing elevator music on Zoom. It's still fun, but it's not the same.
It's not the same, yeah. Our New York City Business Anthropology meetup has been online, obviously, and it's not. We're looking forward to getting back. There's a lot of things that I don't mind doing remote, but that's one that in person just makes a lot of sense.
Yeah,
the networking, and that the networking isn't there, and that's such a big part of meetup. Of any meetup. And so to wrap up, I guess you have a book coming out. We'll just mention that again. You want to say anything about that?
Well, I will say, it's in the future still, so I don't have like a publication date for it. But I wrote a book on the application of mobile technology to television development. So the creation of what was called social TV by the people I worked with, meaning like TV where you can actually participate on your phone in the programs. Mm-hmm. And so the book is called Push the Button. And it will, I would say, follow me on Twitter, and you will definitely get lots of notifications. You'll get me saying, "Hey, look, the book is now coming out on this date," and
very good.
But hopefully this summer we'll be productive on that front, and we'll get those revisions done. It's weird to be doing that again, but
cool. Well, I look forward to seeing it. I'll be linking to you on Twitter, and then of course, when the book comes out, happy to share it. But on that point, so where else can everybody find you?
Well, you can find me on LinkedIn. So my LinkedIn is just Liz Rodwell, one long word. So you can find me there. And my Twitter is also just Liz Rodwell, one word. Although I mostly use Twitter to yell at politicians. So...
Isn't that what all of Twitter's for?
I'm pretty sure that's really what it's 30% bots and 30% people yelling at politicians, and then academics talking shop. But I do really try to follow the UX community on there and see what people are talking about and posting about. And I've been surprised that LinkedIn has turned into such a real social network. Like there's always cool announcements of events and opportunities on LinkedIn these days. So I'm always happy to have new LinkedIn friends.
Certainly the pandemic has seemed to supercharge LinkedIn in a way, and particularly because of online events, virtual events, and it's at the point where it's at literally just too much. Like there's so many things you want to join, you just can't listen to them all.
There are so many events. Actually, I wanted to say I'm really specifically doing work right now on conversational UX. And so if anybody is up for letting me interview them, I would love to talk to people working in voice UX, on voice assistants, in any area, or conversation design. So please hit me up. If you either have resources in that area that I should be aware of or are willing to be interviewed by me, it would be pretty helpful, and I'm hoping to add that to our program here. So, Yeah, that's
cool.
my big push right now.
Very good. Well, I'll link to you on Twitter, on LinkedIn. And so, Liz, thanks. Appreciate your time today. It was great talking with you.
It was great talking to you too. Thank you for having me.
Thank you all for listening to the Anthro to UX podcast. To learn everything you need to break into UX, visit anthro2ux.com. There you will find all the podcast episodes and career coaching resources. Please like, share, and subscribe. See you next time.